And today we have a great opportunity to have words from the leader of Estonia. Please welcome His Excellency, Mr. President.
Well, good evening. Can you hear me? Anyway, good evening. It's been a long day for me, just to know this is my 7th talk today, so. But anyway, I'll try to stay awake, and I've put myself to sleep, let alone you. I'm very happy to be here and to talk to startups in Estonia, because in many ways Estonia, I've already called for about 20 years the startup country, and the kind of environment that we have in my country is one which has fostered startups in a way that I rarely see elsewhere. The Economist says that we have the highest number of startups per capita in the world. I don't know if that's true, but they write it, so it's The Economist, so it's probably pretty true. But in terms of statistics, we do have more startups in tiny Estonia than, say, Latvia and Lithuania combined, and both Latvia and Lithuania are larger than we are, so we're doing something right. And in fact, and the success rate of startups in my country is exceptional in that 5 out of 10 startups actually survive, which, if you know, which in terms of startup rates is really quite exceptional. And in terms of quality, Seed Camp is in London, a startup sort of pitching festival, and they invited the 30 best startups in Europe to come and participate. And even though Estonia is about 0.2% of the population of Europe, 7 out of the 30 best startups were from Estonia, and Estonia both had got first place and third place. And the first place startup, GrabCAD, which now runs mainly out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, right next to MIT, donated their €50,000 prize to the number 2 company because they didn't need the money. So so why do we have this kind of environment? Well, first of all, one part of it, which I would argue is crucial, where we do differ from many countries, is that, in fact, the government is highly supportive. We're not supportive in the sense of giving huge subsidies, but since the government itself has been working for 20 years on as a startup, looking for innovative solutions, so too the business sector is looking for innovative solutions. That it means that for the startup community, they have a good partner, a welcome partner, or a partner that welcomes them. I mean, a typical story, which took place already 15 years ago, was when our biggest and best bank was bought by the Swedes. The Swedes came to Estonia, they came to the bank and said, okay, now we own you, and we're going to take your people and send them to Stockholm, Sweden, and so they can learn about how to do computer or internet banking. And of course the Estonians said, sure, yeah, well, I'm sure we'd love to learn, but maybe you'd like to take a look at what we have here. So then the Swedes said, yeah, okay, let's see what you do. They looked at internet banking in Estonia and they said, we're sending you to Stockholm to do our internet banking, which is kind of sums up where things are. And the general environment in the country has been really to encourage the development of IT services, the government's responsibility has been to actually create the infrastructure that would allow secure online transactions of all sorts. And that is where that's the main role of the government, is actually to provide a secure identity, which for those of you, this audience probably knows what I mean when I say that it's a two-factor public key infrastructure based on an RSA 2048 encryption key, which is about as good as it gets today. In contrast, the NSA actually shut down a company called LavaBit in the United States last year because they were using 512 RSA, and because they couldn't crack it. Because Snowden was using LavaBit to send his information. They couldn't crack it. So we're at 2048, so we're probably safe for a while. I don't know how long. But I mean, one of the results of this is that 99% of income tax returns are done online. 98% of bank transfers are done online. We have had 6 elections in Estonia using e-voting, and the last 3 have all been at about 25% participation rate among the voters. We have digital prescriptions used by 98% of the population, so that you don't get pieces of paper with your prescription, but the doctor, you can call your doctor, you say you have this problem, he says, okay, go to any pharmacy and you will get your prescription to whatever you need. And of course, the other key we've had to the secure communication is having a digital signature law, which means that a digital signature is equivalent legally to a signature done electronically. So that automatically gives the digital world a legal basis that does not exist in most countries, which allows you to do all kinds of work both in the private as well as the public sector, in which you actually have contract law applied to the digital world, which is a major step forward. Digital signature laws exist in a number of countries, but unless you actually have the technological side of it, it's not much use. At the same time, if you have the technological side, but you don't have a digital signature law, then really there's nothing you can do. You can't sign contracts online. The second part of this, in addition to having a digital signature law and a secure online identity guaranteed by the state, is the architecture of the system that we use, which, again, since there are technical people here, we basically have a state-supported but publicly and privately used enterprise service bus, which means that there are all kinds of services on a backbone which is provided by the state, but in fact it's used by banks, companies, all of which use a secure online identity and the legal basis of a legal signature law, which means that you can sign contracts with private companies and so forth. Private companies can sign contracts with private companies. All of this can be done digitally. Last December, we had, for the first time in the world, a state-to-state treaty or agreement that was signed digitally. It was signed by the Prime Minister of Estonia in Tallinn and the Prime Minister of Finland in Finland. They didn't meet, they just were both online, and using the secure identity made this historic step. And in fact, what the agreement was about was that in fact Finland would take over the system that we have, the distributed system that we call X-Road, the enterprise service bus system that will then allow us to actually share these services between 2 countries. So that, for example, if you're a Finn and you come to Estonia and you lose your penicillin because you've had too wild a night the night before, and you need a new prescription, You call your doctor in Finland and you say, I need a new prescription, and he'll sort of key it into his computer, and then we'll be able to go to any Estonian pharmacy to take out the prescription that your doctor in Finland has given you, and vice versa. And of course, you can add all kinds of services onto this. I headed the European Commission task force on e-health, in which well, I don't know what will come of it all, but even the services that we already have with the health record, in which your health data are available to you and owned by you, can be used anywhere if you're an Estonian, but we hope in the future Finns will be able to use the same system. I would like to see the whole thing used in the EU, but we'll see. Not every country is as advanced as we are. And then also key to what we've done in terms of the basis of allowing a startup culture to function is that we basically created legally the need for a cloud. Because we have a law that says that the government may never ask you for any bit of data more than once. If you think about your experience in life, I mean, every time you deal with the government, you have to put your name, your address, you know, how many kids you have, where you live, I mean, what you do, your whatever it is, what your bank account is. The position, I mean, the law in Estonia says that, okay, the government already has this. You may not ask the person again. What this leads to is an incredible increase in the efficiency of the way things are done in the country. And the example I bring is, how long does it take to register a company in Estonia? It takes 18 minutes. Now, since we live in the European Union, where the requirements for setting up a company are the same all over, we look at Italy, where nothing is done digitally. At least registering companies not done digitally. And there, you have to provide the same data and go through the same checks to register a company as you do in Estonia. So you have to put your board of directors, and then you have to make sure the board of directors is not, none of them have gone bankrupt, they don't have any outstanding debts, they paid their alimony, they paid their taxes. And the way it's done, when it's done on paper, is that you fill out your form, and then the paper is taken to one ministry, and then they eventually get to look at it, and they put a stamp on it, then it goes to the next ministry, another ministry stamps it. And there, the whole process takes 18 months. Estonia takes 18 minutes, simply because the data are already there. It's just a check to make sure that everything is okay. These are the kinds of simplifications that we have enacted, and that creates the environment in which startups are already functioning. And it is also the environment that fosters startups to come up with new ideas. And in many ways you can say that a lot of these innovations came from the private sector, because the government was interested in these innovations. The private sector was highly interested in innovations. Behind of all this interest is the psychological need to move quickly, to leapfrog beyond the other countries, and so it's kind of a esprit de corps that we have there, that we need to move on and do more and do more. And this all leads to, from the state side, an ecosystem. It's the state contribution to an ecosystem that says, startups are good, we're interested in startups. We're not out to screw you, we're out to help you. Same thing in the business community. The private sector, which is the already established private sector, is in a position which they're looking for creative, innovative approaches to whatever it is that they're doing, because they know that that's a way to do things. And the kind of, I'll give you an example. I just saw a startup that in the fall, they were pitching. Now they just got a huge investment. But 5 months ago, this startup with this very interesting problem. We have a lot of trees in Estonia. Estonia, Finland have the most trees in Europe. I mean in terms of land. And so a lot of them get cut down, and you have these huge piles of logs. And you have to know how much wood there is. Very hard to figure that out, actually. But then one guy who actually was engaged in logging, but was fairly creative and researched the literature and discovered that in fact there is a technology that exists for finding cancer cells, because cancer cells are also, have the same property that you're looking. A lot of these round things, which are the ends of the logs, and you want to count up how many good cells and bad cells are there. In fact, and then you have this complex mathematical integration process of then counting up the big circles and little circles and figuring out how many are there. So he took this technology from which is used in cancer research and applied it to looking at logs, which if you look at logs all facing you, which is a big task to figure out how much wood there is, well, he figured out how to do it, and now he's making a lot of money because we have a logging industry that is in fact interested in finding solutions to all kinds of problems that are faced. And so this environment, this ecosystem, allows us to move ahead. Now, where we are going with this is that with a government and a private sector that realizes that IT is the sector for growth, with an IT environment or government that also has a keen interest in transparency, and the transparency that is created by having IT solutions, that means that, well, the kinds of problems that you have, and we saw recently, I guess, pictures of the palace owned by the president, or now ex-president of Ukraine. I can tell you that I would not be able to do that because there's no way I could live in a house like that on the salary that I make in Estonia. But he could, based on his salary. And so, at a more basic level, with the transparency of how much money goes to salaries and how people live, this makes Estonia by far the least corrupt country of any post-communist country. And in fact, if you look at the statistics, you'll also see that all of the countries that you've heard about in trouble in the Eurozone, they're all ranked worse than Estonia on the Transparency International corruption scale. And of course, all of them are old members of the EU. None of them are they're not formerly communist countries. They're all sort of long-term non-communist countries, but they do have very serious problems with corruption, which we don't. And I would say that it really comes down to the fact that, as I always say, you can't bribe a computer. You can try, but it doesn't work. And so this makes our environment very conducive to startups. Now, there are a couple other things that should be kept in mind also. It's not just the government and the private sector that is interested in it. I have to say also, there were a couple of other things. One of them, which actually is related to the government, which is that about, almost 20 years ago, we decided that we really have to get people working on computers in the schools. We had this program called the Tiger Leap. It actually didn't, the idea of the program was just to get computers into schools. And get kids playing with computers. Now, this at the time was not very advanced. We were not teaching kids to code, but we were getting all of the children in the country in front of computers and playing with them. Whenever you have an environment in which you give free rein to students to actually play with computers, say 3 or 4% of the students actually will start figuring out what's going on and start learning to code on their own. And since educational reforms usually take 15 years to take effect, I would argue that one reason why we're doing right now so well with so many young people, so many people doing startups, is that after 15 years of being constantly in this environment of facing computers, which is very different actually from old Europe. A lot of countries are a lot richer than we were or are, but they really didn't pay attention to getting kids working with computers. And today we see the fruits of those efforts. So you have these 28, 29, 25-year-old people doing startups who've been playing with computers for the past, well, ever since they started school. So that is part of it. And then I guess another big stimulus was the huge success of our greatest invention, that was Skype. Because what Skype taught to the, I mean, you all know what Skype is anyway, but what it did in the country was it showed that here were 4 young guys who were in tiny Estonia, a country that was at that time very much felt a former Soviet republic and all of the usual nonsense that's associated with all that, actually invented something that became world famous and made them a lot of money. But far more important than made them a lot of money, it got a lot of these, they created something that the entire world was using, which was such a new concept to young people that, wow, you know, if I use my brains and I do this with the computer that these guys did, and actually it wasn't that major a brainwave. I mean, voice over internet protocol, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer to me. I just wish I'd had the idea to do it, because then I wouldn't be here and I'd probably be doing something else. But in any case, this is a fundamental form of, this is what got a lot, if you talk to the people who today are, you know, sort of late 20s who are doing startups, I mean, everyone sort of thinks of themselves as having the next Skype. Now, of course, you know, in the United States, everyone thinks, I'm going to be the next Steve Jobs. Well, we have our own little Estonian core of people who did their own, I mean, they're all little Steve Jobs, except, you know, they're not worth, you know, whatever, 100 billion, but they're worth, 20 million. That's not bad. $20 million is not a bad net worth to have if you're a kid from Estonia, trust me. I know all too well. So that also helped create this environment that means that a lot of people really think about doing things in the technology field. They do study. We do have now, moving beyond what we did 20 years ago, we now have a pilot project in which we are beginning to teach kids to code in first grade. Which actually I think is, one of the reasons why I do all of this stuff is that I had a bizarre math teacher who taught us to code when I was 13 years old. So I was programming in BASIC, which is a language that used to exist. No one uses it today, but when I was 13, but that gave me enough of a background that when I was in university, I was doing assembler on a PDP-8. That shows you how old I am. I'm 60, but a PDP-8, 8K of memory, and it took up twice as much space as this here. So that was, it's about as, if you think of computers today, it's quite sad. But it was the beginning of everything. And I would argue, just to finish up here so I don't talk too long, and they told me that I had to, is that if we want to survive in this world, which is so rapidly changing, we do have to pay, governments and private companies have to pay even more attention to IT. IT and IT development is what has allowed a small country that was 50 years behind everything due to the Soviet occupation to become the #1 country in the world in e-governance. Ahead of Singapore, I say. We have an Estonian Singaporean in the audience. But we compete with Singapore. Those are the only country we do compete with when it comes to e-governance. And it is, in the case of Singapore, okay, it was already advanced 20 years ago. We were really behind. So what we're seeing is that power relations are really changing in the world based on how far you've come in IT. There are countries in the world that in fact have been big, fat, and rich for 60, 70 years that do not pay attention to these things, and at their own peril. I'm not going to name them, but I mean, basically, you will see in the future that the whole idea of who's advanced, who's not, is going to change dramatically based on how much a society and how much a country is invested intellectually, politically, financially in the development of IT. And why I claim this, and this I will end my little introduction to, is that okay, I don't have to explain this to anyone. Everyone here knows Moore's Law, yes? Okay, I mean, Moore's Law that says that the power of computing doubles every 18 months. I mean, it's a classic exponential function. You can just plot it on a log graph. Well, that, and then if you want the best example of what an exponential function is the myth of the creation of chess. When the Shah said to some guy, invent me a game, and he invented the game of chess, and then the Shah says, what do I pay you? And he said, well, just put a grain of rice on the first square, and then double it, put 2 grains on the second, and then 4 on, double it again, 4 on the third. And the Shah goes, oh great, what a dummy. I mean, that's all I have to do is just give him a little bit of rice, not realizing that an exponential function means that by the time you get to square 32, you basically had all of the, that was already all of the rice in India, and once you get to square 33, you're already looking at real problems, because you'd have to go invade someone to get that much rice. I would say that what we see with IT right now in Moore's Law is that up till now, or until recently, the doubling of computing power every 18 months was restricted to gadgets. You know, most of you are too young to remember when calculators came out. And the first calculators you could add and subtract. And then you had calculators that could multiply. And then you had a calculator that could take square roots. Now we have smartphones. The doubling of computing power in the next 18 months, following Moore's Law, which is held up now, will mean that basically we are going from square 32 to square 33, or maybe from square 33 to 34. But what is happening in society is that it is changing so rapidly because of the huge amount of changes coming with the huge change in computing power, that societies will be either changing very rapidly or they will not be changing very rapidly. And the countries and the societies that take up these changes will do very well and will move ahead even quicker and even quicker. And those societies that don't teach their children coding, that don't implement e-solutions, that will continue to work on paper and with the sort of the old software of the laws and not have new software, that is new laws, are going to fall behind, regardless of what their GDP per capita may be this year. In 10 years, it's going to be all different. And one of the keys to making it all different is having a vibrant startup scene. And that's what we're all about, and that's why I'm here to listen to what you have to say. Thank you very much.